Before we begin, we're going to cover off on a couple of things you need to keep in mind when progressing through this masterclass. If you have any previous injuries or conditions that are going to limit your range of motion, you need to make sure you go and get those sorted, or you go back to the Unlocking Your Movement masterclasses we've provided in order to make sure you tick all the boxes before we head into the more advanced versions. A lot of these masterclasses are going to take extra wrist, shoulder, thoracic, hip mobility, and also shoulder stability. So be sure you tick the boxes and drop back if you've had any injuries or you feel like you're not quite at the level. I'll provide a few extra tips and tricks as we progress through the masterclass, but at any stage, if you feel like you're not quite there, drop back because we want to avoid injury. The next element, it's practice. When we're looking at these advanced bodyweight moves, we want to be making sure we only hit the required sets and the required reps, which have been provided or will be provided before you progress to the next stage. And I want you to use a term or a practice called greasing the groove. When you're practicing these movements, don't do them in excess. The idea is to do them when you're feeling rested and you're feeling like you can tackle a small amount bit by bit and progress over the long term. Adding excessive load or volume into your training with these advanced moves too early could result in injury. So pick 2 levels, stick with those for a day. If you hit the required level on the sets and reps, progress the next day. Don't advance any more than 2 levels at any one training session. So steady as she goes, take time to progress through the movements, make sure you hit the sets and reps before you advance any further. The pistol squat. Not only does it look pretty cool, it's also a great expression of strength that you can work on with minimal or no equipment if you don't have a gym and you want to train leg strength. It also highlights stability and function. So before we get started, what I would like you to make sure you have is passing numbers on those ankle mobility screens in the Unlocking Your Movement masterclasses that we have available, and you have no previous ankle, knee, hip stability or mobility issues. So if you've got any previous injuries, I want you to make sure they are all sorted before you progress on this journey. All right, stage 1, bodyweight squats, but under control, under tension, and to a tempo. So we have 2 sets of 20 reps here. What we're gonna do is find that nice comfortable stance using our duck waddle that we use. And from here, arms are up in front, which you'll see why we want those arms up in front. We're pulling in with the hips, under control, as deep as we can control it, and then calming out. So we're using this nice, easy 5-second tempo, pulling in with the hips, squeezing out with the glutes, coming up as far as we can, maintaining at this bottom position, arms upright, shoulders back, big chest, driving to that top position. It's all about tempo and time under tension with our pistol squat team. So don't rush through those and take your time. The next stage, stage 2, is our close foot squat. Now before we begin, depending on how our hip structure is set up, you might bottom out or not be able to go lower than a certain level. And that's okay. So what we want to keep in mind is if we do hit a hard stop, i.e. our hip bones stop ourselves from lowering any lower, that's okay. But our close foot squat is feet together and we're going through that same tension or time under tension as step 1. And our trick, under control, lowering down and driving out. 2 sets of 20 reps. We might have to focus on that reach a little bit more now because we've cramped our mobility by closing our feet and we're coming back out under control. So you can see those hands, which we'll use through this whole entire serial, it's all about that counterbalance. And then by cramping our mobility by putting our feet together, we're closing that range that we have. So we might need those hands to stay balanced and under control. Same tempo, 5 down, 5 up, 2 sets of 20, and then we can move on. Step 3, bench pistols for our pistol squat journey. 2 sets, 10 reps, left and right. So when I say 2 sets, 10 reps, I mean 2 sets of 10 on the left, 2 sets of 10 on the right. Okay, so we can use a bench or an elevated surface here, and we want to be in a position where we can have our bum just in contact with the bench so we're nice and safe. Because we're challenging balance, if we fall back, we're just going to simply land on the bench. Now from here, we're finding that start of our pistol squat position. Leg extended, arms reaching, and we're nice and stable here. Now the cues I want you to think of is pulling in with the hips, reaching for the bench, whilst also maintaining that balance out front. So from here, we're reaching, under control, bum touches the bench, and we come back up. So the reason why we want to just tap the bench and come back up is so we don't lose tension. When we're going back into the movement, legs extended, bum taps without losing the tension and driving back up. 2 sets, 10 reps, each leg. Don't rest on the bench if you can help it. Just tap, return, 10 reps, and then we can progress to the next step. Step 4 for our pistol squat. Now we're going to try a couple of single leg loading versions of our lunge, which are going to help us maintain stability throughout the movement, but also challenge a bit of the lateral hip aspect, so the balance when we shift into that lateral hip, or that single leg balance position for our pistol. So we're going to work on the skater lunge first. Now this is 2 sets, 10 reps each leg, and then we're going to go through the airborne lunge as well. So choose what you feel like is your weaker and work on that version as much as you need. They're probably going to deliver the same outcome, but we want to target what we're weaker at to improve as we go. So our lunge, skater lunge version, So skaters you're probably used to of that dynamic jump left and right. We're going to slow this skater lunge down now and do a backwards reach behind our body and then coming back up to the start. That's going to help load that loaded leg of the down leg that we're going to drive off of and shift the weight to be able to balance on that single leg a bit more effectively. So we're reaching through as far back as we can, foot's in contact with the floor. We're reaching forward if we need to and driving up. We're kicking back. If you lose a bit of balance, that is absolutely okay. Loading and driving back up. You notice all my weight is shifted on that front leg. So when we're going through, we might be in contact with the floor here, but all the weight's here. And we're driving back up. You'll see that behind leg or the rear leg raise up off the ground. The next one's our airborne lunge. Now this is going to be more typical of our forward to back pistol squat, where we're going to use that reach. Our knee's going to tap the floor on the back leg, and we're going to return to that top position. Now remember, it's all about tension. So don't rest or bash the knee into the floor on the ground. Tap, return. So we brace through the midsection, tap, and return. If we lose a bit of balance, it's okay. We've got to get comfortable with that weight shift on the feet. We reach, and we come back to the start. So as you get more confident, you should just tap and return like so. So there's our skater and our airborne. Practice both. Find out which one you need the most work on. Put a bit more time into that. 2 sets, 10 reps each leg, and then we'll bump on to step 5. Step 5, counterbalance pistol squat. Now we're working 5 sets, 5 reps a piece each leg. Spend some time here, guys, because this is where we start to work the full range for our pistol, and we now have to rely or make sure, that our ankle mobility and our hip strength, hip flexor strength, and hip stability are on point to deliver. So we're going full range. So remember, like I said at the start, if you've got any knee issues or previous history of ankle, knees, hips, you need to make sure you're actually in condition to start doing this. So make sure you're cleared by a health professional if you need to be, and you pay due diligence to those steps before this one. This is where it gets a bit difficult. So if we find we can't get into the full range, we need to check things like ankle mobility, do our trigger point work, look at our hip stability as well, and really pull this apart. But we're going to use a counterbalance. Now the reason why we get a counterbalance is because due to that depth, we are going to struggle to balance in the bottom of the position. So by extending and then crushing that weight in your hands, this can be a kettlebell, dumbbell, this is a tiny little 2 kilo dumbbell I'm using. You can use as heavy as you need to start with, and the idea is to get to less and less weight as you progress. But we're going to use a principle called irradiation. So we're going to crush this in our hands, which creates tension, which allows tension to bring through the body, or bleed through the body, sorry. And if we get tension here, it improves our stability in our trunk, in our drive out of the bottom of the pistol, which is making life a hell of a lot easier to get out of the bottom. So remembering that diaphragmatic breathing, if you haven't or can't diaphragmatically breathe, you want to revisit that unlocking the movement section where we go through breathing drills. But basically, we're in our start position, we take that breath, and we come out. So you might notice a little bit of a knee bend on that extended leg. That is your hip flexor trying to grab and gain stability. That's pretty normal. Ideally, when we progress towards the end of the pistol, we want to have that leg where it doesn't do that. So grabbing the breath, squeezing that dumbbell, driving up into position. So counterbalance, 5x5, left and right. Work this one, take your time to work on this one, guys. If you can't get to depth, check ankle mobility and hip stability, and then we can progress to step 6 and then our final step 7 of our pistol. Step 6 for our pistol squat is our elevated pistol squat. Now on step 5, I showed you what happens with that hip flexor when it tries to grab stability when you're extended. It'll make your knee bend and it'll shorten your levers. The uneven pistol will allow you to work on your hip strength or hip flexor strength as you're progressing to your pistol. So you can use a counterbalance in this as well, but the idea is letting the foot drop lower than the other foot that you've got up on a weight to take a bit of that strain off the hip flexor to allow you to keep that straight leg through the pistol squat. Now, if we have a look, we set our foot up on the edge of a bench. You can use a box if you want to be higher up, but ideally we want to be high enough to let that leg sweep down and out of that position. So when we're here, we can use that counterbalance like I mentioned. We've got to reach and let that leg go forward. So a bit of weight shift is fine. It's all pretty normal. You would have seen that leg go lower than the line of the top plate, which is relaxing that hip flexor a little bit. That'll allow you to get into that bottom position and be able to drive out a little bit easier if you're still working on that hip flexor strength. So grabbing the breath, and driving out. So there's your uneven pistol team. 5 sets, 2 reps, left and right sides. So that's 5 sets, 2 reps, left and right. So you'll be doing 20 reps total before you progress to that pistol on the floor. Step 7, we've made it. It's pistol squat time. Now, remembering to pay the effort for our elevated and our counterbalance pistol. So by the time we get here, you should have a lot of reps in the bank to be able to go for a full pistol. So if we haven't spent the time there, simply just work on your mobility, your stability, and those 2 drills if we're up this end of town. And then when we attempt our pistol here, we should be pretty confident we'll nail it on the first go. So same cues apply, pulling into the movement, keeping the weight shifted nice and evenly over the foot, counter reaching with those hands, squeezing the hands if we need, like we've got that counterbalance weight in our hands, and driving up out of the movement. Remembering keeping an eye on what your hip's doing on that extended leg. Is it bending? Is it staying straight? But we're nice and stable, balanced. Make sure we get that breath before we take off. A nice little tip to help you start, you can stamp your foot in the floor to get that nice stable footing, and then we can go from there. So let's take a look. And the left side now, stamp, grab the breath. and out of the bottom. So you notice there's a bit of weight shift. You might lose a bit of balance. It might not be smooth to start, but that's the whole idea of it. It's challenging your hip stability. You're gonna have to make sure your ankle mobility is on point, and you're gonna have to make sure you've got that balance sorted. Squeeze out of the bottom of the movement, and there we have it, our first pistol squat.